The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guests today are Mayor Sue Carleton of Georgian Bluffs and Georgian Bluffs CAO, Cnythia Fletcher. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Now, Cnythia, I do have to tease you a little bit because the last time we spoke, it was the very first day on the job for you,
Right.
and you're still here.
Yeah, I am, David, and thank you. It was a warm welcome my first day, and here we are a year and a bit later and meeting again. So thank you.
Yeah, and I trust that you've been able to settle in and you've gone through an election and you're beginning to work with a new council.
Yeah, I mean, reflecting back on 2022, it was, I would say, a year of trying to gain some stability in Georgian Bluffs. And you're right, it was all hands on deck to run a municipal and school board election. And we started the year with COVID protocols and dealing with those. And we finished the year with probably the storm of the century. And, 2022 went out with a bang. So we worked hard.
Do you hope 2023 will be a little quieter?
I do.
Well, if there's anything that is predictable in politics and in municipal governance, it's that it's unpredictable.
That's true. That is true.
Absolutely. Speaking of elections, can we just go back a little bit? What was the method of voting in Georgian Bluffs?
We had multiple methods of voting. So people could vote by phone. They could vote in person. We had, I believe, in addition to 2 polling stations on election day, we had 4 advanced polling stations. And then there was great uptake for electronic voting method as well. So we tried a multi-prong approach this time, and we think a couple of those were very successful.
Yes, I noticed across the county that almost all of the municipalities have gone to internet voting, and were very, very successful. I think the turnout here in Owen Sound was on the order of 90%, right. And so it was, but that was pretty much across the board. Do you think that will be the future, Cnythia, or a hybrid of a variety of methods will be the way to go in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I would, we've done a bit of a debriefing, and we would bring a report about a year in advance to our council to make some recommendations. But I think online voting is certainly one we would recommend. We may make some recommendations around some in-person voting as well.
Sure. And I know that the other big issue was the voters' roll, the voters' lists. And that will change, I gather, in the next election because it'll all be handled by the province. That in the 2026 municipal election, it'll all be provincially administered.
Right.
And hopefully it'll be a lot more up to date than they have been in the past.
That's what we're hoping for, because that's the starting point. Really, is the voters list, and if there's inaccuracies or we have to update them, that's a bit of a slowdown in the process.
While we're on the subject of computer voting, actually, I was just reading something this morning that the province is expanding their computer services and computer online applications for various services, renewals of driver's licenses and OHIP cards and all that stuff. But the other one that was really interesting is you can now apply, within a few months, apply for a marriage license online. Does Georgian Bluffs issue marriage licenses?
I have to admit, David, I'd have to check in with our clerks area. I'm not sure.
Well, that's interesting because
I'm aware of.
Well, some municipalities don't. And I thought to myself, that's a really interesting change because I'm an old pen and paper kind of guy in that respect, and it'll be a big change. I don't think they're allowing you to get divorced online. No,
Probably not. No.
because that's a federal process, not a provincial process. But anyway, it would be interesting to see, because I don't know what the revenue split will be, but who knows? Maybe it's something to think about. Anyway, let's move on. Cynthia, you did something really, actually, this is for you, Sue. You did something really interesting just before Christmas, in your meeting before Christmas, because you had one of your elected members of council tender their resignation for personal health reasons, and you had to appoint a new person. What happened?
So once we received the resignation from Mike Smith, there was a process to go through. So the clerk outlined what that full process would be and what the options were. So we could have held another by-election to elect that next person, or council could have chosen to simply put it out for applications to appoint someone that we chose, or the process we followed, which was, to us, the simplest and the most inexpensive. Choose the next person that the voters would have put in that circumstance. And Isaac Schuldeis happened to be that person. And so that was the process we followed. And we now have Isaac on our council, and I love his energy. I wish I could grab some of that for myself, but he's a great addition to council. So there was a process we had to follow. Sorry, forgot to shut these off.
Yes, you as mayor, you have multiple phones.
I do.
David, just to add to Mayor Carleton's comments, I think some of the reason the recommendation was what it was about a month after the election had occurred. And so, had we been 2 or 3 years into the council term, it might have been a different, council might have selected a different option. But because it was about 4 weeks after the voters had cast their votes, that was one of the rationales for the recommendation as well.
I understand that. I think it makes eminent sense. I know prior to this election, there were some resignations in Bruce County, and they went through a different process, including, I think, appointing. I'm thinking of Saugeen Shores, where there were candidates a member of council who had resigned, and council I did an appointment process. But it's interesting that there is a provision for that, and I think that's worth remembering, that in our democratic system, and that's actually one of the functions of the clerk, isn't it, to make sure that governance continues no matter what.
Well, and this isn't the first time Georgian Bluffs has had to deal with a resignation of sorts. Right after amalgamation, when Larry Miller moved from being mayor of Georgian Bluffs to being on the federal government, the council at that time elected to go through, because it was 2 years after the election, to go through an application and then that process, and then council chose out of those applicants. So that's where Ryan Thompson came on. But this time it just seems so close to the election, and the fact that doing a by-election would be very expensive.
Yeah.
So the idea was to look at what's the least expensive and the best way to appoint the next person.
Yes, because in any other reports I've seen across the municipalities, to run an election, you're looking at well into 5 figures. So,
yep.
Yeah, it's just financially prudent. So
Yes.
It's great. Great. Well, and Sue, how do you feel about your council? You've got a new council to some extent, but you've got some returnees. So are things coming together?
I think so. We've got a good mix, different expertises from everybody. I think working forward, we're going to work well together. We have so far. And I think everybody brings that little different expertise to the table. So it means everything that comes up will be drawing on different members of council. So I'm really pleased. I think as mayor, I've got a good, strong council behind me. That's going to make my job easier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess, Cynthia, your job is to kind of, dare I say it, rein in the sheep?
I'm not sure I put it that way, David. I report to council. No, I think, my job in conjunction with staff is to, we research things, do analysis, we provide information and recommendations to council. I think to your point, I work very closely with the clerk to make sure that, we're procedurally staying on point, that sort of thing. But I'm really the link between our governance board and the administration that is delivering the service every day.
Unless we forget that the CAO is the one employee of council.
Right.
So, I mean, that's universal across the province, is the municipal councils. The one employee is the CAO, or whatever the title happens to be in the differing municipalities. So but I said that rather facetiously to refer to you as keep the sheep in line. But it's an important thing, because there are processes and procedures, and you can't just do things willy-nilly. It's or the province will be having a few words or three.
Yeah, no, you are correct. I mean, there are processes and procedure, and council collectively, as our board of governance, really sets policy and decides on the level of investment that we're going to make in our township, and provides our decision-making body. So
I thought it was really interesting in the discussion prior to the election, we're looking at 6-8 months ago, when there were some issues about conduct within municipal councils. That the point was made by one of the integrity commissioners that it is the responsibility of the council to conduct itself in an orderly manner, and if things go awry, to name it, and to use I believe the word is a point of order. And so you've got to work well together. You really do, and you're responsible to each other who work together. So it's not entirely your responsibility, Cynthia. It is the council's as well.
Well, I think it's definitely council with I'm a support to council, and I mean ultimately I think we all need to keep in mind what we're here for. It is about service to our community, and the more we work together and well together, I think we build that community confidence in both council and in staff.
Now, you came from a very large municipality. You were working in Peterborough, and you moved here. You've had some previous experiences, I recall, Cynthia. Has the transition gone well for you?
It has, David. I mean, I've spent a good portion of my career actually at the city of Kitchener, which is considered a large urban municipality. The previous 3 years in Peterborough, which would be more of a mid-sized city, and now in Georgian Bluffs. And this is we were looking for the place that we wanted to settle and be in long term, and this is it. So yeah, the transition's gone well.
Excellent. The snow hasn't bothered you?
No, I would prefer the snow to that hovering around zero slush. It can't decide what it wants to do, so I'm fine.
Good for you. Good for you. One of the other issues that that was certainly on the table, and Sue, you have raised this before, is the conversations between you and neighboring municipalities. And there have been conversations already with Owen Sound and between the mayors and the CAOs sitting around the table. I know you can't talk specifics, but how do things go?
Well, we haven't actually gotten to that point yet. So we're at this point trying to find a date. We sent a letter to Owen Sound. It was on Owen Sound Council's, not this week's meeting, but the last one, So direction was given for the mayor and CAO to meet with us. So we're in the process of coming up with that date that we can all sit down and meet. But there are a lot of things I think that we could sit down and work together with. We don't have to get rid of our boundaries, but acknowledge that our people, our residents go into the city residents come out here for some of the trails and different things. So there has to be a way that we can all work together for the benefit of everybody. So that discussion hasn't happened yet, but we're working toward it.
Well, that's good to hear, because you are right. I skipped a beat there when I said there had been a meeting, but no, you're right. It just came to the council, and direction was given to the mayor and the CAO or city manager. But it has been noted that Owen Sound's population doubles when during the day, and it's from people driving in.
Yep.
And the number of people are on 10th Street both ways, because people from Owen Sound go out to Georgian Bluffs to shop along the Sunset Strip.
Yep.
There's a back and forth.
Yes.
There's a back and forth. I was listening to a conference or a video of one of the sessions at Roma, which occurred recently, about housing. And what was really interesting is, I think it was one of the CAOs from Lennox and Addington was pointing out that one of the things that they have discovered is that when the counties can get together and they can work to the benefit of all of their communities, because there is true synergy and true savings found in working together. And I thought that's a really good lesson. Really important to hear that lived experience from down east. So looking forward to hearing more about that.
Yep.
For sure.
Yeah, no, one of the other things that, speaking of municipalities working together, biodigester.
Mm-hmm.
Does that give you indigestion?
No, I don't think anymore.
What's the story?
Yeah. So during 2022, we had a series of meetings with the Joint Board of Governance for the Biodigester, had a number of joint council meetings with our council and Chatsworth. And really what we've landed on is we've let an RFP to invite creative bids for alternate ownership operating models for the biodigester. So the plan is to receive proposals, and then probably by halfway through, we're hoping by halfway through 2023, we've vetted those proposals and done some negotiation. It will be the joint councils that will decide on the proponent for that alternate ownership operating model. But we're fairly excited to look at a different future for the biodigester, and getting to a point where we can maximize the asset that sits in between our two townships. So more to come on that one. I don't know if the mayor wants to add her comments as well.
I think if I could add anything to it, it would be that I'm glad to see when we went out for this RFP, we didn't put restrictions on it, trying to tie someone else into, well, we want you to offer based on our criteria. We've put it out this time for people to come forward with what would work best for them. We have to keep access to the lagoons. So letting them know that and saying basically, how can you work around that? What can you offer? What would you see as a method for us to go forward with that would work for the two municipalities and a new owner, a new partner? It's kind of up in the air, but this time we've left it for those people that are interested to come in with what works best for them. Sure.
And it's good to hear that you'll probably have something by midsummer, perhaps, or early fall. And I'm quite sure that by the time we've had a couple of rounds on this show, you'll you'll have something solid, because actually, to be honest with you, that's one of the perennial topics. Kind of like the Markdale Hospital with our previous MPP, who was there right through his term. We were talking hospital. Well, with Georgian Bluffs, it's biodigester.
Mhm.
Well, it used to be airport and biodigester, so we're moving forward.
That's true. You're quite right. That was the other Georgian Bluffs perennial issue was, okay, what's happening with the airport?
Yeah.
And that's off the table now.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you will be, we've talked about in the past what's going on at the Kemble Community Center. And I wondered what's happening there. Are plans beginning to firm up?
I think I'm going to defer to the CAO. She's got more information on this. And we do have a report coming to council tomorrow night. It is coming in at a substantially higher dollar value than we had expected. So we're having to step back and take another look at that. But I know Cynthia is more up to date on what those numbers and everything is. So I'll turn this over to her.
Right. So I might start by reminding the mayor that it's tonight, not tomorrow night. That
it's tonight.
My
days are confused this week.
Right. Yeah, I might start back last summer and fall. We started quite an extensive community engagement related to this project, and we had a number of town hall kind of meetings or community engagement meetings, also multi-method. So we had surveys that went out. We had online ability for people to give us feedback. We have engaged Masri Architects back in September to lead us through a design process and community engagement process. They took all the feedback and ended up with a couple of preferred or option designs to consider. We did a tabletop exercise at Shallow Lake in November with a number of people, and again had the designs online, and basically culminated in what was, from everything we heard, a preferred design for the Kemble Community Center. As the mayor's referred to, then we moved to a costing exercise, and what that's resulted in is us bringing a report forward to council tonight to say we've engaged the community, we have what we think is a good design, but unfortunately it's coming in much higher than would have been anticipated, and there's a number of reasons for that that's outlined in the report. And so, council will consider the report tonight. The staff recommendation ultimately is that we take a bit of a pause, and we are aware of another stream of funding and have been in contact with the funding folks, and they feel that the project would be a good candidate for the funding. So should that be the path council would like us to take? We'll look at that. So.
Yeah, so having looked at the proposal, I thought it was interesting that one funding body that isn't as attractive as another funding body, and I guess that's the way these things work from time to time, is that you got to figure out who's got the best horse and who can give you the most value for the project that you want to do.
Well, and I think some of what came out as we went through the process was we had applied for funding on an existing building to refurbish. And what came out a lot of times through the process, some felt that not working with that existing building and going to a brand new build would be the better idea. So it is another option, but we at that time only had funding to go with refurbishing an existing. So with the prices coming in so far out at this point, I think we have to look at maybe even, is that the proper location for a community center such as that? Or Are we looking at something different? It brings forward a whole lot of options. One of the things that came up at Roma, the one session I sat in on, was a community, and I think it was called Wellesley, had done their community center, added a health unit piece onto that, had looked at what other things, and, would you add a fire station, sub-office type thing to that? So I think there's a lot more things we could look at going forward with that.
Sure. And that makes a lot of sense as well, because you've got development happening along Cobble Beach is a perfect example of that. And you having a fire station further up the road up Grey Road 1 might be something to look at for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and David, just to your comment about different funding streams, I think that's sometimes the challenge for communities to understand as well. Is we may have a high priority project for our community, but it doesn't fit the criteria of a particular funding stream. And so sometimes people wonder why one project might go forward over another project, but sometimes it's just fitting the funding criteria as well.
Now I'm getting a little message saying my internet connection is unstable. So if you freeze or I drop, that's what it's all about. So I'll have to keep on going. Okay. The voice in my ear says I'm okay. So that's a good thing. All right. So with the Kemble thing, with the Kemble project, kind of potentially in abeyance, but maybe taking a step back, that also has some budgetary implications as well, doesn't it?
It potentially can. I think we have to let the conversation with council happen. I wouldn't want to preclude council's decision, or direction. So it could have budget implications. It might not, depending on what council decides to do.
For sure. And as we speak, council hasn't happened, so we don't know what council will do as council will do, as the saying goes.
Right.
Okay. Now, so you referred to Roma as having attended Roma, and we're coming up on break, but I did want to just ask your general impressions. Was it you've been to Roma before, I'm sure.
Yep.
This is what, the first fully in-person meeting?
Yes, since COVID hit, yes. Yep.
So it's been 3 years.
Yes.
Was it a big relief to be there?
It was nice to be there. It was nice to be able to meet with other people from municipalities you normally don't have contact with, like outside of the Grey Bruce area. So I always enjoy that. You learn so much from all of them based on, we all tend to face a lot of the same situations. It's how do other people deal with them, and you learn from that. What takeaways do we get to make a process easier or better for us?
Sure. Well, at this point, we actually now I've had the word that yes, we can go to break. So we're going to do that and come back, and we're going to talk more about a few other things. So there's lots to talk about, as always. I'm David Shearman, friends, and this is Politically Speaking. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
My Uncle Cheney was one of over 150,000 Indigenous children that were taken to residential schools between the 1800s and 1996. My uncle ran away from school wanting to get home to his mom and dad, and sadly he didn't make it and died of exposure. When Gord Downey found out about my late Uncle Cheney's story, he wrote Secret Path, a series of poems that became an album, then a graphic novel, a documentary, and a concert. Gord met my family, and together we formed the Gord Downey and Cheney Winjack Fund. Together, we are sharing Secret Path and other reconciliation resources with legacy schools, setting up legacy spaces across Canada, and hosting events like Secret Path Week to inspire all Canadians to engage in reconciliation. Before he left us, Gord asked us all to do something.
You're gonna figure it out.
Will you join us? Together, we can make Canada a better place.
Lovely viewers, it's your host of On the Couch, Antoine El Hashim, reminding you to tune in for every episode of Season 9 of the longest running and most loved local queer talk show on Rogers TV. Check it out.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guests today are Sue Carleton, who is the mayor of Georgian Bluffs, and the CAO from Georgian Bluffs, Cnythia Fletcher. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Be here.
Now, Sue, I wanted to get back to the Roma meeting, the Roma event. What were the highlights of the conference for you?
I think it's always the concurrent sessions that you get a lot out of. And the one that I think both Cynthia and I sat in on at the very first was on short-term accommodations and hearing what other municipalities have done, how they've handled it, what were some of the mistakes they made that they would strongly suggest others don't make those mistakes, and how to actually implement. So one of the key takeaways on that one was make sure you give yourself enough time to explore the full thing. Don't try to rush the process. Another was to implement any regulations through bylaw, not by using your planning or zoning, because with planning and zoning, it's now attached to the property. With bylaw, as a municipality, if we find that's not working, we can change our bylaws. So those were the key things, but there were a lot of other things. And of course, knowing that other municipalities have gone through the same thing and being able to look at the bylaws they've implemented and see how do those apply to us? Could we utilize part of that instead of having to basically reinvent the wheel and everything? So that was the biggest one that I think I got a lot out of. Another session I attended was about planning for potential emergencies. And at first it felt to me like it was northern communities looking for host communities in the south, and they often do every year in case of flooding or wildfires, that type of thing. But it also made me think about what would be something that could happen here in Georgian Bluffs that we would have to look at evacuating everybody. And a wildfire would be that. You know, a lightning strike and a dry summer, how do we get everybody out of danger? And I don't think we've fully explored something like that yet. And yet we do our emergency training every year. We do the emergency exercise. We have EMO, Emergency Management Ontario, involved in that process. But we've never really looked at how we would deal with everybody in the township needing to be evacuated, or a large percentage. So it was interesting. Some of the sessions you can take in and you think, well, maybe that doesn't apply to me. But when you think about it further, yes, it could. So that's the value I get out of Roma and the other conferences. You think about things that are outside of what you normally would think of applying to our township.
Now, Cynthia, as a CAO, you go in with perhaps a little different hat than the mayor or politicians do. What was the highlight for you as a CAO?
Well, I think to the mayor's initial point before the break, I think it tremendous opportunity. There were over 1,500 participants at this event, and from all across the province. And so being able to network with colleagues from across the province, I think you had made comment about municipalities collaborating and working together and sharing resources and not trying to do everything on our own. Sometimes we can partner with somebody. But the other thing, and this was something we were dealing with in Georgian Bluffs from the administration side last year, is sometimes feeling that we're the only one who is dealing with a challenge, or it's unique to our township. And through some of the sessions or the really good networking opportunities, you realize that we're not the only ones dealing with a lot of the issues that we find ourselves challenged with, or the successes that we've been able to achieve, sharing those as well.
Sure, because I mean, short-term accommodations is a very good case study that I'm sure both of you would have picked up on, because short-term accommodations are a huge issue in Grey Bruce. And it's, we kind of all look to North Bruce Peninsula and South Bruce Peninsula, but we're not alone. This is a province-wide issue.
I mean, it is, and there are some tools out there. The other thing that was very much stressed in this topic is really understand how pervasive it is within your community and locations and the types of, so that when the mayor is alluding to taking some time to really do the research, that's what we're encouraged to do. Is not just assume you can replicate. There's not necessarily a one size fits all for all communities.
To be sure. And there's a variety of situations where STAs are useful.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
Go with something you said there, David, about Northern Bruce Peninsula being there, and everybody looks to them as having this, their sort of policies and procedures on it put in place. They were at this session on the Sunday, seeing if they could learn something new, because nobody's is working perfectly. Everybody's looking to how can I tweak it. So it was interesting to see their full counsel there at that one.
One of the interesting things I learned through COVID actually is that there is a seasonal rotation of people who live in cottages over the winter, winterized cottages over the winter, and elsewhere in the summer, but they need that winterized accommodation. And in COVID, it was that disappeared. And there were a lot of people who, and I know I helped to find accommodations for them, who had to be settled because they had nothing. And it was a panic strip. There were some very panicky people because they had no place to go. So it's a very, like you say, do your research. Sounds like, doing your research, knowing your market.
Yeah.
Is a huge issue.
Yeah, and David, this is another topic where council will be receiving a report in probably within the next month. And so, again, I think we're giving you some high level thoughts, but I wouldn't want to, come across as we've made decisions or got the answers before council can really contemplate what we might present to them as well.
I have a suspicion based on what I'm seeing in other municipalities here in Grey Bruce. This is an ongoing issue. It's one that a council may visit, but they will revisit. It's not like you said. There's no silver bullet here. There's just do the research, figure it out, what works for you, and if it doesn't, try again.
Right, and I think the community engagement aspect is really key with a topic like this as well.
Hugely, because it can be very, as we have seen in Owen Sound, it can be very polarizing.
Right.
Very polarizing. So so I hear you saying community engagement, doing the research, making policy that's well-grounded. Sounds like another topic for Politically Speaking down the road, Sue.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that you were also you're part of a delegation to Minister of Health on with Owen Sound on medical recruiting. Is that right?
Yes, we joined them on Tuesday afternoon at a delegation with her name just went totally out of my head, Honorable Sylvia Jones. And as a support for Owen Sound, to show that it affects them, but it affects us as well.
What was your sense? Was it non-committal? Or was it sort of, yes, thank you very much?
I felt she asked some good questions. Her one comment being, what am I not seeing here? And she was good to draw out more information. So I felt good about it. No commitment, of course. They simply can't do that. But I felt that it would be taken away and looked at, given due consideration that it is a problem in all outlying areas.
Well, I know that Mayor Boddy has pointed out that Owen Sound does not qualify for rural physician support because it's not rural. And whereas the other municipalities across Grey County do, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And I look forward, if I can put a shameless plug in here, my guest next week will be Ian Boddy. So I'll be asking the same question of him. But it is something that is across the province. Again, we have a physician shortage. It has to be dealt with somehow.
I think it's getting the message across to provincial government that while Owen Sound doesn't qualify for that rural designation, they service all the rural communities around them who do qualify. Because we in Georgian Bluffs don't have any medical clinics or hospital or anything. So our people have to go either to Wyerton Hospital or into Owen Sound. They have to choose one of those or others in the area to go to be basically serviced in that area. And so saying that Owen Sound doesn't have rural needs is totally inaccurate. So I'm hoping they look at it in that respect.
Well, the other thing to remember too is we have no urgent care facilities other than the hospitals. And when people from larger centers say, "Oh, just go to urgent care," that means we go to the ER.
Yeah.
Although I will give another shameless plug here for GBHS's virtual urgent care service. It works. It's good. If you haven't tried it, try it. It certainly saved me a visit to the ER when I was sick over Christmas.
Yeah.
So, but those kinds of things are really valuable for us here in Grey Bruce. And so, again, we don't have. It's good to hear that the minister was listening and was willing to have the conversations. Let's hope the staff was as well. Were there any other? That was the only deputation subject, was it, Sue?
That was the only one that we were involved in. Yes. Yeah.
Now, there on one of the more intriguing events at AMO but at Roma is the Bear Pit session, which I've discussed with other politicians before, where you all get in the room with the government, with the cabinet. Now, I don't know whether what happens in the Bear Pit stays in the Bear Pit. At the same time, what was the key issue that you felt came out of the Bear Pit session for you?
I don't think.
Talk about it.
Well, my honest opinion, and I've already answered the Roma survey about this conference, is that for me, they could leave the Bear Pit out, because no one actually gives an answer to a question. They sidestep, dance all around it, use a lot of words, but they don't actually answer anybody's question with definitive of what can be done or what will be done or what is being done. So at this point, if it's going to carry on like that, I don't see the value in it. Why waste all of their time being there and waste all of our time listening to them? Give us another keynote speaker that will actually tell us something of value. But that's my personal opinion.
Oh, sure. I mean, but that's interesting because what I'm hearing you say is that you didn't hear anything new. You got the same talking points as we might hear on the evening news.
Yep.
And then let's move on and get some serious content here.
Yep.
Interesting. Do the CAOs get into the bear pit session, Cnythia, or do you have other things that you do during the conference?
We're certainly welcome to attend. It's generally not CAOs that would be walking up to the mic and asking the question, but certainly welcome to observe.
Well, it's interesting to hear that perspective because it's actually, Sue, your perspective is the first time I've heard. I've heard a lot of other stories about the bear pit session, but that yours is the first where you've said we can do something else, and I think that's really quite interesting. We'll see what happens. The other thing
a message to the government that this isn't a value. So giving us a whole bunch of non-answers, it's not a value to us. So I think if they weren't invited for one session, they might come to the plate with a little bit of information for us the next session. Again, my personal opinion.
Sure. Do you find that I know the premier is always a keynote, or usually a keynote, making these big, at least making remarks. Do you find that those remarks that are made by the government are generally, again, the talking points? They're rarely substantive.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
They're simply talking points. Yep.
Yeah. It's perhaps that's I remember days when Roma and many of these conferences were actually places for major announcements.
And they used to be. And there were no major announcement this time or the last couple of times I've gone. So it used to be that was their platform for a major announcement, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Yeah. Interesting. It's the world's a little different then.
Yep.
Yeah. Was there a lot of conversation around Bill 23, the More Homes Build Better Act or Build Faster Act or whatever it's called?
Yeah.
Cnythia, you were.
I think there were no sessions, particularly focused on Bill 23. I think, we've all been working since the fall to try and interpret the legislation. Certainly when you have all of the political parties there, they're all commenting on their perspectives and positions on a piece of legislation like this. So, from my standpoint, you had some trying to defend the piece of legislation and some coming out very strongly with opinions on the legislation. And I think we as municipalities who are trying to wade our way through the changes and the impacts, I'm not sure any of the discussions at Roma provided any greater clarity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sue?
I would agree with that. While there was discussion, there were questions, and we hear from all the leaders of the other political parties. There wasn't anything definitive that told us exactly what this legislation is going to do to us or for us.
Mm-hmm. So along with the staff, as political leaders, you're just in a wait and see position.
Yes.
So, and I guess from the municipality side, Cnythia, your planners are earning their keep, trying to figure out exactly what the implications of the legislation is.
Well, and this is probably an example, David, where we are working very closely with all of the member municipalities across Grey County. Grey County itself, both their planning services and legal services have been, working with our planners and CAOs to interpret the legislation. Many of us who have planning consultants doing work for us, we have a planning consultant who's done a fairly good job of themselves trying to interpret the legislation, but it's an ongoing body of work right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's you can tell as reading the minutes. For example, the correspondence that comes to municipal councils, letters of concern, and the volume of the letters of concern, or to hear planners when I think of recent Owen Sound council sessions where people were saying, we're not sure what the implications are, but we're working on it. Mm-hmm. So it's absolutely fascinating. Well, let's move on to Grey County, because Sue, big changes there. There's a new committee structure in place.
Yes, it's taken, initially it was to take 5 committees and roll them into one. So it was determined last fall to leave the Agricultural Advisory Committee on its own. So economic development, tourism, the climate action, I can't think of the fourth one, were all rolled into, it brought it down to 2 individual committees, almost going back to the old standing committee idea. So one is more on community services and one is more directed sort of corporately. So that was a big change, and I think it makes sense. Mental health and addictions was the other one. So that task force had completed what they were doing, but there's still probably work should be done there. So that will carry on through this one big, larger joint committee.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Does
think
that mean more work for you?
No, actually, I was on all 5 of the other committees, so I'm now only on one, and then I picked up the Urban Roads Exchange one. Mm-hmm. So no, actually, I'm hoping it's less work.
Fewer meetings.
Fewer meetings.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure. And of course, Cynthia, you had alluded in our earlier conversation to the ongoing consultation with your colleagues at the county and how important that is. So, well, the county also passed the budget, at least the county budget, which looked like a very reasonable increase in the county levy, which is a portion of our one of the 3 portions of our budget. So it was 1.7%, I think. So
1.48.
Ooh, even better.
Yeah, 1.48 is what we arrived at the end of the day.
Good.
So staff had started at 3.66, which wasn't totally out of range when you think of where inflation is, but through some different, county council wanted it coming in lower than that. So they were kind of ingenious in how they arrived at that, using some more transfers from reserves. Some items, even when staff looked at it, they said this will fit better in first quarter 2024. So projects that got put off and we'll deal with in a year's time. So I think staff were really good at that. And then county council spent a whole day going through everything and discussing it all and arrived at 1.48. So I think it's a good place to be.
Good. And that'll show up on our tax bill at some point in the next year.
Yes.
Now, the budgeting process for Georgian Bluffs, we've got about 4 minutes, so I wanted to touch on that as well. Where are you at in your budgeting process?
We are just getting into it. So I will let Cynthia speak to this because she knows exactly where we're at.
So we've been working all fall. You finish one budget and you start the next year's budget. So we were working all fall as departments to put our budgets together. Our treasurer has been compiling all of that information since January and meeting with department heads. We have a full senior management team meeting tomorrow to review where we are and compile everything. And then council will have a budget meeting on February 27th, where they will consider what we've consolidated, and we'll have discussion about budget priorities. We're presenting a 2023 business plan in conjunction with our budget. So yeah, more to come after the 27th. We'll see if we've hit the mark for council or whether there's more work to do.
Well, I always get a chuckle out of the various budgets at this time of year because it's budget time, and you see municipalities coming in initially at ridiculous amounts, and everybody goes, "Oh my goodness!" But indeed, it gets trimmed back, and I'm sure that most councillors have got a little number in their head that they want to keep taxes or any increases to. It's sort of ballpark, and I'm sure that you've got the same idea, Sue.
I do. I'm never a fan of the real low budget increases. I think you can fall behind if you don't try to keep up to inflation in some manner. And that doesn't mean coming in at inflation is at 6%, so we're going to have a 6% budget. I think there's creative ways to work around that. But you don't ever want to come in at that 0 or less because you've just lost traction. You're going to have to make that up sometime.
Yes, I recall a few years ago when that happened in one of our local municipalities, and there were several years catching up of significant increases in their taxation. Yes. So a 0 budget increase is just unrealistic, as you say.
Yeah, I think, David, this is an example where council and staff working together. This is a great example. I think our staff team's approach is not to come in with the extreme number either. We're likely going to come in with what we think is a reasonable number, but also reflect for council all of the things that we did see as priority, but we've moved sort of below the line. Because, otherwise we want it to be seen as council and staff working together on this, not staff sort of setting council up with, well, here you go.
And on that note, I have to say thank you to both of you because we've just come up against our time, and it's always a pleasure to have you, Sue, and you, Cynthia, to have conversation about Georgian Bluffs. And of course, my friends, to you, thank you for joining us. I'm David Shearman. We will talk again.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Piper Post here with me for Knights. Tune in on Fridays at 5 to watch Knights hockey. Alessandro Supino here with Knights hockey. Tune in to Rogers TV 5 o'clock on Friday for the game.
I'm afraid your driver has tendered his resignation. I've lined you up a new driver.
City TV, Tuesday.
You must be the investigators.